Merry Takesmas, everybody. We have got a lot to talk about. Diner is sweet and a good game mode. Actually felt like there were meaningful stakes. People could bypass with gold, fine, and others could grind. Plenty of extra freebies. In the future, the how-to video would be more detailed on bub marts and advice to use bankroll management. Okay, so there's going to be a fair bit of conversation about Deadpool's Diner. That's one of the major reasons I wanted to do a video like this, so I could get feedback from my audience and then see how I felt about how other people were feeling about it. Deadpool's Diner, I think, has two major problems as a mode, both of which sort of stem from the same thing. I think the number one thing that is wrong with Deadpool's Diner is that it was designed as a 14-day mode. And all of the problems in it come from that. The implementation of it as a 14-day mode, because my understanding is over the course of 14 days, a lot of the problems that people have with Deadpool's Diner will resolve themselves, but they create this initial shock upon seeing that is awkward and bad for a game debuting a new game mode. And the two specific instances of this that I want to talk about are, first things first, the pop-up for buying back in, and second things second, the ability to scale exponentially with your bubs. So let's talk about how a lot of people, when they started with Deadpool's Diner, lost that first game and immediately got a pop-up that was like, hey, would you like to pay to play more? A lot of gacha games have stamina mechanics, and I don't necessarily blame Second Dinner for saying, okay, we want this mode to last 14 days. How do we make it so this isn't just blasted through in 2 minutes? Well, we're going to put a stamina mechanic on it. We're going to tie your stamina, like your effective, the amount you're allowed to play, to your stack, right? That's fine. And then we'll let you buy back in if you want. That allows us to monetize the game mode, but it also doesn't necessarily make the game mode pay to win. It just makes it pay to speed up, which is exactly their lane. That's the exact kind of thing that they seem to like doing. So you have this situation where you have this new game mode, it's very exciting, but the first thing you run into if you lose is an inability to continue playing, which again, it makes sense over the course of 14 days where you want the game mode to be challenging and players to be getting rewards and all of that, but it doesn't make sense at the introductory period of the game. They should have done something to smooth that out. And the second thing that they should have done to smooth out the introduction to the game, there's a bit of sticker shock going on. Because you join this game mode and you're playing for a very small amount of bubs, and then you look at the reward that you want and it's 15 million bubs or 500 million bubs, and you're like, that's impossible. How am I ever going to get that? And that is a problem of exponential scaling. By the time you're like 2% of the way to 15 million, you're like way more than 2% of the actual way to 15 million. By the time your bub stack is a couple 100,000, you're getting far closer to, due to the exponential scaling, actually hitting that 15 million. And once you hit that 15 million, again, the exponential scaling means that like you are well over half of the way to that 500 million. And that doesn't really click for a lot of people. It's not intuitive. People don't see that and they're like, oh, I'm halfway done. They see that and they're like, oh my God, I still have so much to go. And this compounds with the first issue that we talked about, because yes, over a large enough time scale, over those 14 days, it probably will be fine. But you create an introductory experience to your mode, which is, I instantly lost, I now have to pay to keep playing, and I feel like I am so far away from actually getting anything good. And that, I think, is the major problem with the Diner. Cassandra being touted as the counter to Arishem was what led to players disliking Deadpool's Diner. They felt they had to get the card right away, rather than taking their time with the event. I do think this was a mistake on Second Dinner's part to say, hey, we have this card coming out, and we think it's going to be good against Arishem, and it turns out it actually is really good against Arishem. But yeah, my instinct with that is not something they should do in the future. I don't think they should make a problem solve the problem with another card. I'm not even sure they thought that would be happening. My instinct is this stuff was planned out way before they knew whether Arishem was going to be good or whether it would be relevant that Cassandra Nova was good into it. I don't think they could have had a reasonable knowledge of that. Maybe they did, and I'm not giving them enough credit, and they totally knew everything that was going to happen. I don't know that that's true. My instinct is that Arishem surprised them a little bit, and then they were like, okay, we don't want to nerf Arishem because we have Cassandra Nova coming out, and then they put it in the patch notes, and I think at least one of those things was a mistake. Specifically the one where they put it in the patch notes, right? It's hard for me to get mad at not literally knowing the future. Like, to us, right now, living in this world, it's very obvious that RSM is good, but that is the kind of thing that was the product of millions of people playing the deck, and I think it is not necessarily a huge mistake for them to be like, oh, well, I guess we didn't think it was going to be that good, right? I don't think that's, like, the worst thing on Earth. I also think that it is a very bad idea to, like, Mobius him, though. Like, when Mobius came out, and Mobius was a problem, and, like, it didn't really do much to solve Loki. Luckily, Cassandra is more effective against Arishem than Mobius was against Loki, I could say that much. But the major thing that I don't think they should have done is say, we expect Cassandra Nova to deal with Arishem. I think that was a mistake to say. Deadpool's Diner was fine and never needed, nor needs any changes for the future. Even while playing off-meta C5 and some Sarah Surfer near the end, I've already reached 500 million bubs. Perhaps it could be presented better, but the concept was very well done. Yeah, I think that actually is my issue with the mode, right? It was a smart concept, a clever concept. It felt like it just needed like maybe a month or two more in the oven. Like, if I had to have one major critique of Deadpool's Diner, it's like these very specific situations with like when people pick up your game mode. And it's like, I know that sounds like it's not a big deal, but it actually is the biggest deal. It's like the most important thing is that when people pick up your game mode, the first experience they have with it is fun. That's like the most important thing, not having it make sense over 14 days. And so when we talk about this problem of potential perspective, right? This mode is well designed from the concept of we want a 14-day game mode. It's not well designed from the concept of we want people to have fun the second they pick this up. And I do think that maybe in the future they can really sort of rework that. I don't think it's a hot take, but the consequences for losing feels like it far outweighs the reward for winning. It's actually very discouraging. I wanted to talk a little bit about this because this is something I have seen from players who are experiencing burnout after playing at a high level for a very long time. Like, basically everyone starts to feel like this at some point, and my take is when you start to feel like this, you need to stop playing a little bit. What it represents, and as someone, I have felt this so much, where a win feels like what you expected, and a loss feels devastating. And to me, and this is just going to be psychoanalysis of myself here, I'm not necessarily going to say this applies to everyone, I'm going to talk about myself in relation to how I feel about this. I feel like that is a representation of my own entitlement. I feel like I'm entitled to wins, and therefore the losses are the aberration keeping me from what I am entitled to, but because I feel entitled to them, I don't actually feel the joy in winning anymore. And that is something I have felt in Magic the Gathering, in Hearthstone, to some degree in this game. In most games I've played, I have felt that, right? Because I have been pretty good at most of those games. And one thing that I really try to keep an eye on when I start feeling like this is entitlement. You have to be honest with yourself, because if you're not honest with yourself, this kind of stuff can take over and absolutely ruin you. When you queue up a game of any card game, any game with randomness in it, you are accepting, and you need to tell yourself this, that you could lose to a worse player. You have to be okay with that before you click the play button. You have to be. You are accepting that you could end your session down on cubes. You have to be okay with that. You have to be. You have to put that work in to make yourself be okay with that. You need to be honest with yourself about the consequences of your actions, because you are playing a game that has a decent amount of random elements in it. You need to be clear-eyed when you enter that game about what you could happen there, about the fact that your opponent could randomly generate the best card and you could lose. And you have to just be okay with that because you still played correctly. And I have been working very hard on getting myself to a point where I no longer feel this entitlement to every win. I'm not good at it yet, but I'm trying. And I would encourage anyone who's feeling what this person is describing to please work on this, because I strongly suspect that a lot of people feel the same way as me, where a win doesn't mean anything because that is their baseline expectation, and a loss is devastating because it disrupts that baseline expectation. And the word for that is entitlement. You are not entitled to wins. You always have to keep working. And the flip side of that coin is I have tried to get much better at celebrating my wins. I have tried to get much better at being happy with the wins that I get and being like, yeah, that was awesome. I have to talk like that to myself because otherwise it does start to feel like I'm entitled to that stuff. And you have to police that in yourself. Your first spotlight key each week should not be allowed to be the fourth option. Okay, I actually think this is kind of sick. Like, that's actually kind of dope, right? Like, I have not thought about this before. A lot of the time when I see a proposal like this, I'm like, oh, that's just saying, I want more free stuff, right? But no, I actually think this is good. I think this is actually a good proposal. I like one of the things that I really take issue with the current spotlight system is how it seems to encourage being stupid. And I would like it if it's slightly less encouraged that, right? Like if it was just, let's say you're YOLOing keys. You have a 1 in 3 instead of a 1 in 4. Sure, that's fine to me. One of the interesting things about this, though, is that only limiting it to your first key, I'm not actually sure how much that would do. I think it would, like, it fundamentally changes your odds of getting the new card in 4 caches, like, to your favor. I think it moves the average caches down from, like, 2.5 on average to 2 on average. I personally think that given the amount that Series 5 and 4 have grown by over the last year, this actually would be an acceptable adjustment for that quote-unquote inflation. I think that's actually probably a very good thing to do. One of the things I like to talk about when it comes to adjusting spotlight caches is that while it's not easy to just be like, I would like more free stuff, I think it is easy to maybe present an argument that, hey, the value proposition of spotlight caches has changed as Series 4 and 5 have expanded, and it has specifically changed in such a way that missing out on a card is now a bigger punishment because it takes so long for that card to get back into the spotlight caches. So maybe providing a slight buff to getting the new card might actually be the right way to alleviate that in a slight way without costing yourself such massive income. This idea, I actually think, does do that. Like, it's something that I've been ruminating on for a while. How do we buff people's ability to get the new card without it just being, here's more free stuff? And while this one is a little bit of here's more free stuff, I don't think it's very out of line with the way in which the value proposition of spotlight caches has changed. I like this more than any other suggestion for fixing spotlight caches that I've ever heard. Hydra Bob is better than Nocturne. Same power, costs 2 less, and doesn't lose you the game when you move it. So that is a very slanted accounting of Hydra Bob versus Nocturne. Nocturne can also win you the game when you move it, about as much as she can lose you the game, and she can make you clear up these problematic locations that are very good for you, and she doesn't require you to save your snap as an investment. I don't know how many people have played with Hydra Bob. I know this person has, but one of the awkward things about Hydra Bob is that your snap is now a gameplay mechanic. So if you snap early, you lose the ability to use that gameplay mechanic. Nocturne has none of those restrictions on her. I do think Hydra Bob is an underrated card. I also think this is a comparison that is purposefully hyperbolic for the sake of being a little bit shocking. Nocturne is significantly better than Hydra Bob. The internal move is actually, in my opinion, probably the best possible ability you can put on a card. If you had to put one piece of text on any given card, the ability to move itself is as good as it gets because of the way it allows you to fix early positioning mistakes and allows you to allocate your points on the final turn of the game when it really matters, as opposed to on turn 3 when you don't have as much information. Feels like SD barely test these cards before release. They had a huge issue with Zabu energy reduction, but release Aurashem, which is a similar effect. I see takes like this a lot. I'm not even going to talk about the first part. I want to talk about the second part, which is energy reduction is always broken. I think this is actually a terrible take. Without energy reduction in the game, there is a significant flattening of what Marvel Snap games look like. They are very much about playing the best possible points at any given point in time. It's very much about good stuff decks. And that's not true without energy reduction. But energy reduction, ramp, these are things that change the tone and tenor of how Marvel Snap works. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about is Aurashem and Zabu are actually nothing alike. Zabu specifically allowed you to do a couple of very specific power plays. One was Iron Lad on 3. The second one was like Enchantress Shang or Shang Darkhawk on 6. It was very specifically about that stuff. Whereas Arishem is about something totally different. Arishem tends to be about accelerating out disruptive fives. Leech, Doc Ock, right? Like, that's what it's about. It would be about Professor X if they didn't nerf that, too. It's about doing that and then using your extra energy to clean up the messes those make to allow your disruption to win the game. Very actually different. Like, Arishem was like proactive disruption. The Zabu decks were like reactive, answer the board kind of decks. And that is a meaningful difference in terms of how these things play out. People like to talk about how energy reduction is always broken, but Sarah's been in the game basically the whole time and has almost never been broken. Mr. Negative is a hugely energy reductive card and hasn't been broken since the beta. Like, I think people get hung up on this stuff, but people focus way too much on the one side of the energy to power ratio and not enough on the other side of the energy to power ratio. The vast majority of cards that get nerfed are not cards that are reducing the energy of stuff or reducing the energy of themselves. That's one way to be good. But the more common way to be good is just to be undercosted. Elsa Bloodstone, for example. Old Silver Surfer, for example. Traditionally, the cards the community focuses on as super broken are the ones that let you do something that is obviously unfair. And that means like, oh, I'm paying nothing for this. That looks way more unfair. But the cards that seem to actually perform the best, the cards that are the best, are the cards that are adding numbers to cards, not taking them off. When Zabu was around, Silver Surfer was a better deck statistically, according to the devs of Marvel Snap. Even when Zabu was reducing by 2. When Zabu was reducing 4s by 2, and Silver Surfer was buffing 3s by 3, Silver Surfer was a better deck. And I think a lot of people get very stuck on energy reduction as a blatantly unfair thing, and don't really notice how good stats cards are. Stats cards are insane, because remember, it's two sides of the same coin. You are paying energy X for output Y. And adjusting the output can be just as strong as adjusting the input, the energy. And I think that people really miss on that. So other than missing on Arishem and Zabu being similar, they're not. This also misses on people focusing too much on energy reduction as broken, as opposed to focusing on it's an input-output thing. They're both related. Snap requires a lot more skill than people give it credit. In more than 65%, winning was an option, and although usually the reason we lost is viable, sometimes micro decisions like where to play a card on turn 1, win or lose games, and that's the difference between a good to great player. That is true. I do think that there is this tendency in Snap to run into a 50-50 situation and play it like, you know, lose the coin flip on a 50-50 and then be like, oh, I need to do the different thing next time. But that's not necessarily true, right? Like, that's not necessarily true at all. Losing 50-50s is very often losing 50-50s, and you just kind of have to make a read based on what's actually likely to happen. And sometimes, you know, you lose the 50-50. One thing I did want to highlight, though, is the conversation about positioning on early turns, because I talked about this a little bit. I alluded to this earlier talking about the move cards. This is actually why cards like Jeff and Nocturne are broken, because with a normal card, your positioning can come back to bite you. With Jeff and Nocturne, it never comes back to bite you. They are always perfectly positioned for what you want to do. And that is why they are so completely absurd as cards. The ability to internally move means that whatever endgame state you want to set up, you can do with no cost. And so they are effectively removing this aspect of skill, per se, where you like have to see your endgame 5 turns in advance, because with Jeff and Nocturne, you do not have to see your endgame 5 turns in advance. It does not matter. You can make your endgame be whatever it is you want it to be just by moving them around. And I think that really should drive the point home as to just how good internal move is on a card. I was really struck by this when I was talking about Kate Bishop for my video on the upcoming cards, who is a 2-3 that looks competitive with Jeff in terms of what she's giving you, but she has like 10 lines of text because she has multiple cards she can generate and all of that. And Jeff just has like the 2, But one of the Jeff lines of text is like the strongest possible line of text you can put on anything with reasonable stats in the entire game. It's crazy how strong internal move is. Deadpool's Diner shouldn't have a pay-to-win feature. Being able to buy bubs kills the point of the mode. Having bubs regen once per hour instead of once per minute is a lost opportunity for more engagement. There are two things happening here. I'm going to talk about the second one first. Having bubs regen per hour instead of per minute is a lost opportunity for more engagement. I actually think that's true, especially after they added the new super low stakes thing at the beginning. Definitely is a lost opportunity for more engagement. I don't know why they did that. I think that's a mistake. They should regen maybe like 5-minute intervals or something like that. I don't really know, but it definitely shouldn't be an hour. As far as the first part of this, I do think that the one thing they should have really avoided is "you've gone bust, please spend money" as a pop-up the second you start the mode and lose. I think that's a really bad thing. I mean, maybe they should have just had a bot be everyone's first opponent. That might have worked too. But I do think that this all sort of ties back into the issues with presentation as opposed to issues with the fundamental game mode itself over the course of 14 days. It's more issues with the introductory experience than anything else. And that's not necessarily wrong. It's just something they definitely need to fix for this time, for the next time they do this, if they do it the next time they do this, if they do it. Now, as far as the specifics of what this is saying, where like Deadpool's Diner doesn't need to be pay to win, I think it would be pretty hard to sell your boss on a mode where you take a card you were going to sell and you give it to everyone for free and you don't give them the ability to pay you for it. I think that that would be the kind of thing that if my job was making money, I would be like, what are you doing? Why are you taking a card that would make us X amount of money and then having us make zero money on it? And so in order to make that pitch work, you have to be like, no, we'll be able to monetize the way in which the card is given out. We'll be able to monetize this game mode in some way. And while I do think the way in which they monetized it, like having bubs be both your stack and your stamina mechanic, is interesting. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it, but it's definitely not how I would have it's not how these things are done in like other gacha games. Yes, I'm calling Snap a gacha game because this for the record, whenever I think about Deadpool's Diner, what I see in my head is the like 4-star NP5 servants that you get in Fate Grand Order once a month, where you like go through an event to earn the servant and then upgrade them, and you like play through that event over the course of the month, basically. That's what I think of when I see Deadpool's Diner. I'm like, okay, that is intuitively what I relate it to. And so I think that would help, where like a lot of my criticisms of the mode are related to that. I will say, having the monetization integrated into it did allow me to totally bypass the mode, which I enjoyed because I don't want to grind for this card. One thing that really frustrated me about this was I couldn't just spend my tokens on Cassandra Nova. I have so many tokens. Let me spend money on your game, please. Like, what if I don't want to engage in this game mode? I have more tokens than I have time. Let me just use those. Premium mystery variants are rarely premium. Most give out 700 gold variants. Should be either the 1200 variants or the new Spotlight variants. Then they would feel premium. So there's like a genre of Marvel Snap complaints that are actually just, they should give us more for less. This is one of those. Premium mystery variants cost 800 gold. They are, I believe my understanding is 33% of them are 1200 gold variants. 66% of them are 700 gold variants. So the weighting is actually a little bit in your favor on the value prop, assuming you actually value the variants at their prices. What this is saying is for 800 gold, you should get something that costs either 1200 gold or 2400 gold. If you did that, they would raise the price of a premium mystery variant. It's literally that simple. Like, if they made this change, they would look at it and they would be like, oh, well, now premium mystery variants cost 1500 gold. And then this person would get mad at that. Like, there are so many complaints about Marvel Snap that fundamentally boil down to, they are selling something that I want, but I don't want to pay the price they're selling it for. And that's fine. But you have to be honest about that and not pretend it's a problem with the system. It's not a systemic problem that they're selling something you want for more than what you want to pay for it. That's a you issue. That's you. That's not the game's problem, because there's a million people who don't care about variance, right? Like, if you want to pay extra to make your cards look cool, but you don't want to pay that much extra, I mean, that sucks, but it's not a systemic issue. And the other thing people like this will do all the time is say, if they did this, more people would buy it. But what they actually mean is they would buy it, and they assume there's a large cohort of people like them. I'm going to be honest with you. I see this stuff a lot. And I don't mean to rag on this person specifically. It's really not about them. But there are so many critiques of Marvel Snap that boil down to, I want this thing, but not at this price point. And every time they are phrased as systemic issues or fundamental issues with the product being offered, and never as, damn, I really wish they were selling this for less. Because I would have so much more respect for this stuff if people were just like, I wish this was cheaper. I would buy it, but now I won't. I think that is super valid. There are plenty of cosmetics that I would buy, but I don't because they're expensive. But that's not representative of a problem with the cosmetics. It's representative of, I have other things I want to spend my money on, right? Like, why would I do that? 9 times out of 10, Second Dinner has a card coming to nerf whatever big problem card the community is complaining about. Example, Arishem and Cassandra. So 2 things. 1, I think it would be very bad if this was something they were doing intentionally. 2, I don't think it's true. I think it's happened twice. Like, I think we've had Arishem and Cassandra, and then Loki and Mobius, and that's it. That's the only times this has happened in more than a year. So I don't think we can really reasonably be like 9 out of 10 times that's true. I don't think that's true at all. Actually, I think the vast majority of balance problems tend to get fixed by balancing and the OTAs and the patches, as opposed to like by selling the solution. I think, actually, personally, that Cassandra being free is the only thing that could have made this anything but a bad look for Second Dinner. Because even if they like totally whiffed on this and they were like, we weren't really sure how good Arishem was going to be, we kind of just made Cassandra anyway, and then it turns out Arishem was busted, which made her busted, which I would say there's probably like a 40% chance of that, and a pretty decent chance that they also knew Arishem was busted. I don't actually know. And then just like 20% chance they knew none of that stuff. But my instinct is that it is a bad game plan to release a problem and sell the solution. I think that's a bad idea. I think it would be bad if they did this, and I think they mostly don't do this. Loki, Mobius, Arishem, Cassandra are the only 2 examples I can think of that are like really, really there. I think maybe if you dug into it, you'd find other stuff, but I don't particularly see a lot of evidence for it. And I do think that, generally speaking, they're not good enough at predicting the meta to do stuff like this. Like, they're good enough at saying, all right, this is something we want to have a counter to in the game, but it seems more a little bit like haphazard than it is like, we know this is going to be good and we need to make a counter for it. And sometimes it works out like that, and sometimes it doesn't, is sort of my read on that. And this is one of the times where it worked out like that. And frankly, if Cassandra was a normal card, as opposed to the reward for Deadpool's Diner, I would be a lot more annoyed at this, honestly, because I do think it is a bad precedent. People crying about decks or cards being strong ruin the fun for others because they end up getting the cards or decks nerfed a week after they release. Snap players can't learn to counter or play around a meta, they just whine. I am going to choose to read this as a critique of me personally, because one thing that really happens a lot is I will point out a card is too strong, and people in my comments will get mad at me. They'll be like, KM, you're going to get this card nerfed. And I don't really think the correlation goes that way. I think it goes the other way. I think when I'm complaining about a card that's too strong, it's usually because it's too strong. And when Second Dinner looks at their internal data and they see the thing that I see, then they nerf it. I strongly doubt, based on every conversation I have ever had with anyone at Second Dinner, that they are listening to content creators. It's like, this is a thing where even if they heard everything I was saying, one of the things I've noticed, and this is like specifically about Glenn Jones, is I will say a thing. I'll be like, here are my reasons for the thing. And then he will throw something back at me that is like, oh, damn it, you're right. And I'm frustrated that you're right because I was so confident in the thing I was saying. And this has happened multiple times, most recently, actually, in the comments of my last video, where Gnome talked about kind of the opposite of this. He said something along the lines of they should balance for high infinite. And Glenn was like, actually, no, we don't want to balance for high infinite because if we balance for high infinite, we run into this issue. This issue where people don't actually get to experience the metagames. We have to balance for the wider range of people because we want those metagames to be experienced by the wider range of people. And so I think to come into this version of the hot takes and say explicitly the opposite of what Glenn Jones said, which is we don't do this. Yeah, I don't know. I think that a lot of the time, and not every time, but a lot of the time I'm right about this stuff because I'm right about this stuff. Like, I am correct about what cards are issues a lot of the time. I'm not correct about it all of the time, but I'm correct about it a lot of the time. And that's because I play a lot of the game. I think about it at a very high level, not to like suck myself off here, but I'm pretty good, right? And I think that oftentimes it is reasonable to assume that someone like me may come to the same conclusions as the people who actually have data on the back end. Not all the time. I've definitely been off about some of this stuff. I've definitely been like, oh, they should do something about this. They changed something else, and it turns out they were smarter than me. Like, I do firmly believe that the second dinner balance team is way better at balance than I am. I am kind of a hack. I am fairly good at identifying problems, but very bad at actually solving them in an elegant way. That's not my gig. I can tell you what an issue is, but I am not great at having a holistic view of how to fix an issue. I am good at being like, that's a problem. I'm not good at solving it. And credit to the second dinner balance team. They are really good at that. There have been multiple nerfs, multiple balance changes where I have been like, man, that is so good. That is so much better than anything I could have thought of. And I do think that like there is a lot of that credit that they get that they don't deserve, honestly. If you had to ask me what one aspect of this game is carrying it right now, it would be the balance people. Like, it straight up would. When you look at everything that goes wrong, right? Everything people get mad about, it's always economy. The things people get mad about, always related to the economy. Even this complaint is a little bit related to the economy because it's secretly kind of about card acquisition. The balance in Marvel Snap is genuinely second to none. I think their balance team is as good as it gets, genuinely. Like, they are very, very, very good at their jobs. And I think, you know, part of that is they exist in an environment that makes it easy for them to be good at their jobs. Any mistakes they make can be cleaned up in like 2 weeks. So maybe it's unfair. Maybe they're not like the best balanced team on earth, but they just have the game that is best set up to be easily balanced. That could also be true. But whatever it is, the things people get mad about are always economy related. And I'm not saying that's not valid, but I do think that maybe someone needs to get their flowers for coming up with the OTA system, basically. Because it has made it so that it is so hard to make genuine balance mistakes and have them last a long time. And I say this while knowing that in the background, Magic the Gathering is in the midst of what I can only describe as a format totally dying because of one card they printed for like at least 2 months. Just like people are not playing the format because of a card called Nadu. And that's the level of balance mistake that Marvel Snap can never actually make. It would be impossible for them to make a balance mistake that lasts that long. And I think that is really remarkable. Like whoever came up with the OTA cadence for this deserves a medal. All right, y'all. Thank you once more for sitting through the Yapatron 5000 Marvel Yap. It's been a pleasure. I've been KM Best. You have been phenomenal. I will see you in the next one.